It wasn't announced with trumpets. There were no headlines, no grand ceremonies, and yet, for those inside the walls of Edinburgh Castle, it was a moment that will echo for the rest of their lives. Princess Anne, the monarchy's most unwavering servant, the woman who carried duty like a second skin, had quietly taken her final steps through the halls she once called home. And just like that, an era had ended. Staff who had stood by her for decades didn't try to hide their grief. Some wept openly, others simply stood still, their eyes fixed on the woman they had come to see as the castle's soul. There was no formal farewell, but the heartbreak was loud enough. Anne wasn't just leaving a residence, she was leaving behind a legacy of silent strength, of work done without applause, and of royal service that didn't need to be seen to be felt. Through the thick stone corridors and historic courtyards, her absence created a stillness unlike anything before. No last-minute meetings, no sound of boots walking to early morning engagements, no warm nods of recognition in passing. It was as if the air itself understood what had been lost. But what made this moment so jarring wasn't just her departure. It was the timing, the quiet manner, and the message it sent. Princess Anne had always stayed, through family turmoil, public criticism, and internal palace battles. She had never faltered, until now. So why did the most reliable royal of all suddenly step away? What caused the pillar of duty to put down the very weight she had carried for more than 50 years? And more importantly, what happens next? This isn't just a story about a woman leaving a castle. It's the unraveling of a deeply held truth inside the monarchy, one that, once revealed, could change everything. Keep watching, because what you're about to discover isn't just a goodbye, it's a reckoning. For more than 50 years, Princess Anne carried out her royal duties with a sense of purpose that bordered on the sacred. She didn't chase cameras, she didn't craft an image, and she certainly didn't seek out sympathy. While others rose and fell in the public eye, Anne stayed exactly where she was needed, right in the heart of duty. She wasn't the monarch, nor was she the heir, but in many ways, Princess Anne became the monarchy's engine, the one member who kept things running when others slowed down. She showed up early, stayed late, and never used her title as an excuse to take a step back. At times, she even carried out more public engagements than the reigning monarch himself. Year after year, her calendar was packed with hundreds of official appearances, opening hospitals, visiting military bases, attending charity fundraisers, and standing in for royals who couldn't or wouldn't fulfill their roles. Anne didn't treat her responsibilities as obligations. She treated them like a mission. There was no fanfare, no fuss, just focus. She believed that royal service wasn't about being adored. It was about being dependable. And that belief earned her something far greater than popularity: respect. While tabloids obsessed over fashion choices, family drama, or royal feuds, Anne quietly made her way to her next engagement. She walked into rooms not expecting applause, but ready to listen. She didn't cut ribbons just for the cameras. She asked questions, took notes, and made sure people felt heard. She did the work, not the performance. Even inside the palace, Anne was known for her no-nonsense approach. Her staff respected her not just for her rank. She didn't bark orders. She led by example. Whether she was visiting a disaster zone overseas or hosting dignitaries at home, she brought the same level of preparation and seriousness to the task. And it wasn't just the public who leaned on her. Inside the royal family, Anne became the quiet center of gravity. When others were overwhelmed by public attention or paralyzed by internal politics, Anne kept moving forward. Her siblings, including King Charles, often looked to her for steadiness in times of uncertainty. She offered advice without judgment, support without strings, and loyalty without conditions. Even in times of personal difficulty, Anne never let the public see her falter. Her divorce from Captain Mark Phillips in the early 1990s didn't become a palace scandal. It became a rare example of quiet dignity in a family often splashed across front pages. She remarried, raised her children, and kept working, No statements, no interviews, just grace under pressure. Her children, too, were raised in that spirit of grounded independence. She chose not to give them royal titles, a move that stunned many at the time, but one that would later be praised for its wisdom. Anne wanted her children to live normal lives, free from the expectations and glare that so often came with royal blood, and true to her values, she stood by them from the sidelines, never using them for attention. But what truly set Anne apart wasn't just her work ethic or her discretion. It was the sheer consistency of her character. Through scandals, royal weddings, deaths, divorces, abdications, and even pandemics, Princess Anne showed up, always. Whether it was a ribbon cutting in a remote Scottish town or a high-level diplomatic meeting in London, she arrived ready. No complaints, no delay, just service. And in that consistency, the public found something to believe in. Anne may not have graced as many magazine covers as her younger relatives, but for those who followed the monarchy closely, she became the royal most worthy of admiration. Because in a world where loyalty often feels like a performance, Princess Anne proved that real duty is quiet, relentless, and deeply real. But behind that tireless commitment was a woman with limits. And as the years wore on, even she began to feel the weight of what she'd carried alone. What no one saw coming was that after all those decades of standing firm, Princess Anne would one day be the one to walk away. And when she did, it wouldn't be for show. It would be for something much deeper. It didn't happen with a public statement or a televised goodbye. There were no farewell interviews, no commemorative ceremonies, and certainly no grand procession. Princess Anne left her longtime residence at Edinburgh Castle in the only way she ever knew how, with quiet steps, thoughtful pauses, and unspoken grace. But those who had walked beside her for decades knew exactly what was happening, and it broke them. The signs were subtle at first. Her morning walks became longer. Her gaze lingered just a few moments more on familiar rooms, and she began to move through the castle like someone writing a final chapter. Wordless, but meaningful. To most, it would have seemed like another normal day. But to the staff, something was clearly shifting. Anne, who had always carried herself with brisk efficiency, slowed down. She didn't cancel her routine, but she softened it. Each morning, she rose before the sun and stepped outside in her plain coat and boots, walking along the castle's garden paths. She didn't speak much, but those who passed her could sense something different in her silence. She wasn't just walking, she was saying goodbye. And though she avoided any formal declarations, she found quiet ways to express her gratitude. A signed photo for the gardener's son, a handwritten note to the housekeeper who had brought her morning tea for 15 years. To the valet who had traveled with her for over a decade, a brief squeeze of the hand and a nod. Nothing more, yet somehow more powerful than words. Her room remained unchanged. The wardrobe still neatly arranged, her desk precisely in order. But her personal journal, the one she had written in religiously for years, remained shut. She hadn't written in days, as if even her words had run out, as if she had already said everything that needed saying. One by one, the staff began to realize she was leaving, for good, and yet she told no one. There was no announcement, no goodbye meeting, no group photo to commemorate the moment. Instead, she walked through the halls one last time, pausing at doorframes, gently touching the polished railing of the main staircase, standing still at the garden gate where she had once watched the sunrise alone. Every movement was deliberate, every glance a memory. To those who had worked with her the longest, it was unbearable. They had spent years by her side, watching her lead without needing to dominate, serve without needing recognition, and love this place not as a royal estate, but as a true home. Watching her prepare to leave it behind was like watching the foundation of a house begin to crumble. On her final morning, the staff gathered in silence by the castle's main entrance. There were no instructions, no official memo. They just knew it was time, and they couldn't let her leave without standing there, one last time, as her quiet honor guard. Some held hands, some wiped tears, others simply stared, their faces frozen in disbelief. When she appeared, she was composed, her expression steady, but her eyes just a touch more tired. She offered a small, grateful smile, her gaze moving slowly across the group. No speeches, no waves, just presence. And then she walked past them, slowly, respectfully, like she had 1,000 times before. Only this time, it was different. This time, they knew she wouldn't be back. No royal banner waved behind her. No press waited at the gates. Just the sound of her boots on stone and the gentle rustling of wind through the courtyard trees. As her car pulled away, the castle fell into a hush. It wasn't just a departure. It was the closing of a chapter no one wanted to end. In that moment, the staff didn't see a royal figure stepping down. They saw someone they loved, someone who had cared, quietly and completely, for everyone around her. Her leaving felt like losing a piece of history, a heartbeat within those stone walls. And still, no one said a word, because that's how she had taught them, that sometimes the deepest goodbyes don't need to be spoken, they're simply felt. The castle might have grown quiet after Princess Anne's exit, but in London, within the walls of Buckingham Palace, her departure echoed like a thunderclap. It didn't take long for the mood to shift. Anne's silent goodbye hadn't been announced publicly, but those who worked within the royal machine quickly felt the change. The heartbeat was gone, and the palace, once held steady by her dependable rhythm, started to sway. No one dared to say it outright, but behind closed doors, whispers spread like wildfire. Some advisors exchanged tense glances during morning meetings. Others avoided eye contact altogether, as if they were all trying to dodge the same unspoken fear. If even she had walked away. What did that say about the rest of them? Princess Anne had always been the constant, the one figure who could be counted on when others faltered. She had stayed through scandal, through death, through family rifts and global crises. No drama, no demands, just a schedule filled with relentless service and a deep belief in the importance of showing up. And now she was gone. The timing couldn't have been worse. The monarchy was already in a fragile state. King Charles, navigating both public duties and personal health concerns, had relied heavily on his sister's silent strength. With Anne gone, that burden grew heavier. There was no replacement waiting in the wings, no one who could offer that same blend of experience, discretion, and iron-willed dedication. Inside the palace, even the newer staff, those who had never worked with Anne directly, felt the void. Her presence had become woven into the way things ran, into the very culture of service that kept the institution from crumbling. When she left, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was a disruption to the system itself. Suddenly, every meeting became a little more strained. Every announcement was weighed more cautiously. There was a sense that the buffer had disappeared. The one person who could quietly step in and hold things together was no longer an option. Even among the family, her absence stirred tension. King Charles, though composed in public, was noticeably more withdrawn in private. For all their differences over the years, Anne had always been his compass. She challenged him, grounded him, reminded him, without saying much, of what duty looked like when it was done right. Without her, his decision-making circle grew smaller, less balanced, more exposed. Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly took the news with a mix of sadness and resolve. She had long admired Anne's strength and subtle wisdom. In many ways, Anne had been her quiet supporter, guiding her without fanfare. Her departure left Catherine more visible than ever, an unofficial torchbearer for the values Anne had spent a lifetime protecting. And then there was Camilla. Some inside the palace wondered if Anne's exit was more than just personal fatigue. The tension between the two had always been discreet, but never far from the surface. With Anne's departure, some began to question whether deeper divisions were finally coming to light, divisions that no one had dared to address head-on. The monarchy had long survived on image, tradition, and hierarchy, but Anne's withdrawal exposed a different truth. The crown was no longer held up by titles alone. It was people like Anne, reliable, unshakable, quietly brave, who kept the foundation strong. Now, without her, cracks began to show. Senior aides began to review succession roles. Schedules were quietly shuffled to fill her engagements, but nothing quite fit. No one moved with her quiet authority. No one stepped into rooms with that rare balance of presence and humility. Replacing her wasn't just a logistical challenge, it was a moral one. Across Britain, people noticed, not with outrage or headlines, but with quiet questions. Where is she? Why did she go? And perhaps most powerfully, what does this mean for the monarchy we thought we knew? Because when the quietest member of the royal family leaves, and the walls tremble in her absence, it's never just about a departure. It's about what she saw coming, and what others refused to face. Anne's farewell was more than personal. It was political. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. And it left a message ringing through every royal hallway that even the strongest have limits, and the monarchy may have just reached one. In a gesture that was both enigmatic and deeply personal, Princess Anne left behind more than just the echoes of her presence at Edinburgh Castle. She left tangible symbols of her lifetime of service. Among these quiet relics, two items in particular have drawn intense curiosity: an unassuming envelope and a weathered journal, each bearing the marks of years devoted to duty, loyalty, and subtle defiance. It began with a simple envelope, delivered without ceremony by her trusted private secretary. No grand announcement accompanied its passage. It was merely placed in the hands of those who had stood with her day in and day out. Inside, a handwritten note conveyed a message that was as brief as it was profound. Words that encapsulated the warmth and gratitude Anne felt towards her staff. The note spoke of the castle's corridors feeling like a second home, of every staff member contributing to the dignified rhythm of everyday life. For those who received it, the envelope was not just a farewell message. It was a testament to a lifetime of silent support and mutual respect. Each carefully chosen word hinted at a deep understanding of what it meant to serve without expectation, to give without asking for accolades. But the envelope was only the opening act. Tucked away in the quiet sanctuary of her private study, concealed within a modest drawer, lay a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was scuffed by time, its pages yellowed but filled with a clarity that belied the passage of decades. To the casual observer, it might have appeared an old keepsake. Yet for those who have since heard whispers about its contents, the journal represented a revelation, the unspoken truths of a woman who had borne the heavy mantle of duty with grace, even when her inner world churned with doubts and hidden emotions. Within its pages, Princess Anne chronicled not the mundane details of her schedule, but her innermost thoughts, reflections on the evolution of the royal family, on the balance between tradition and the modern demands of a changing world. In meticulous flowing script, she recounted memories of crowded state functions, quiet moments in sunlit corridors, and the bittersweet contrasts between public duty and personal longing. There were passages where she recorded the silent pains of watching a slowly shifting monarchy, the moments when the ceaseless expectations of duty began to weigh on her spirit. One phrase, in particular, recurred in the margins, a quiet refrain that suggested a tipping point in her long career. "The day everything changed, I knew I couldn't stay." It was a line that resonated with those who read it, evoking both sorrow and the liberating acceptance of a truth long buried. The journal did not name names or place blame. Instead, it offered subtle insights into the forces that had finally driven her to step away from a life defined by duty alone. It contained observations on the growing discord between old customs and emerging modern influences, and how even steadfast values are vulnerable when the structures that support them begin to crumble. For many within the palace, The discovery of the journal and the envelope ignited a wave of reflection. They saw in those written words not just the farewell of a servant of the crown, but a quiet manifesto, a final assertion that the essence of royal service could not be confined to protocol, ceremonies, or relentless public appearances. It was, instead, about authenticity, connection, and the courage to hold fast to what truly mattered. The legacy contained in that envelope and those pages is one that transcends the mere act of leaving. It is a subtle call to remember that duty, when performed with heart and honesty, leaves an indelible mark on history. In every line of that journal lies a lesson, that sometimes the most profound departures are communicated not with declarations, but with the enduring power of written word, an intimate record of service and sacrifice entrusted to those who remain. In this quiet but powerful legacy, the late Princess Anne speaks once more to the hearts of her colleagues and the future of the monarchy alike, a final reminder of the strength found in integrity and the enduring impact of a life lived in humble service. The leather-bound journal had already stirred quiet unease within the palace walls. But it wasn't until Anne's most trusted aide produced a sealed envelope marked in Queen Elizabeth II's distinct handwriting that the full gravity of her departure came into view. Hidden from public knowledge, protected from even the most senior members of the royal household, this letter had been quietly passed from mother to daughter, an intimate handover of something far heavier than ink and paper. It was legacy. Anne had carried the letter with her for months, maybe longer. No one knew of its existence, not even the king. But tucked away in the final pages of her journal, Anne had left a cryptic line that stopped all who read it. Her words guide me still, even when everything else has changed. For the first time, whispers of a deeper story began to rise. When the letter was finally opened, it revealed not a royal decree, not a list of instructions, but something much more powerful: Queen Elizabeth's private reflections on family, on leadership, and on the monarchy's uncertain future. It was not intended for the world. It was meant for the one daughter who had never wavered. And in it, the late Queen wrote with a clarity and vulnerability rarely seen in public life. "I have watched this family bend," she wrote, "and sometimes nearly break. You, my Anne, were always the spine." What followed was part memoir, part warning. Queen Elizabeth expressed concern that the traditions they had upheld for generations were being traded for image. She described the growing influence of public opinion and the pressure to modernize as a tide that will never stop coming. She didn't condemn the change, but she feared the monarchy might forget its foundation in the rush to remain relevant. Then came a passage that shook those who later read it in confidence. "If the future of the crown is ever shaped more by popularity than by principle, you must know when to walk away. You'll feel it. And when that day comes, do so without noise, but not without purpose." And Anne did just that. For those close to her, the letter cast her decision in a new light. It wasn't a retreat. It was a fulfillment of a promise. Anne had stayed through every storm, quietly bracing the monarchy against collapse. But after the Queen's death, after watching changes unfold that didn't sit right with her, Anne made the choice her mother had once alluded to. She walked away, not to abandon the institution, but to protect what remained of its integrity. The Queen's letter also included a deeply personal line: "Tell no one until you must, not even your brother. Some truths must rest quietly until their moment arrives." Anne had honored those wishes without fail, but now that the letter had been found, its contents discreetly circulated among a select few, those within the palace began seeing Anne's departure not as a mystery, but as a message. Her exit was the quiet ringing of an internal bell, warning of a crown that could lose its center if it wasn't careful. a reminder that loyalty does not always mean silence, and sometimes it means stepping away when no one else dares to. It also became clear why Anne had kept so much to herself. The letter, while filled with affection, carried an invisible weight. It wasn't just a farewell from a mother. It was a mantle passed privately. A final royal act made not from the throne, but from the heart. The Queen had known that Anne, of all her children, would understand what to do when the moment came. That moment had arrived, and now, with the Queen's words revealed and Anne gone from her lifelong post, the monarchy must reckon with a new reality, one where the silent torchbearer is no longer in the room, one where the voice of a departed monarch still lingers, on paper, in memory, and in the actions of the daughter who listened. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a crisis. It was a quiet turning point, delivered in script and sealed with trust. A letter that didn't demand attention, but changed everything nonetheless. Because sometimes the crown isn't passed with a coronation. Sometimes it's handed down in an envelope and carried with dignity until the moment is right to let it go. For all her composure, for all her silence and restraint, there was one truth Princess Anne never managed to make peace with. It sat just beneath the surface, quietly influencing the way she walked through palace corridors, the way she glanced across dinner tables, the way she chose when to speak, and more often, when not to. That truth had a name: Diana. The relationship between Princess Anne and Diana, Princess of Wales, was never as simple as headlines once suggested. They were different in nearly every way. Anne, the embodiment of duty and discipline. Diana, the symbol of warmth and vulnerability. But for all their contrasts, Anne respected Diana in a way few understood. She watched her closely, often silently, and over time came to recognize something real behind the polished exterior, an authenticity that Anne valued more than charm. When Diana entered the royal family, Anne was already a seasoned figure, long accustomed to the rituals of state and the rigid demands of the crown. She didn't believe in shortcuts. She didn't tolerate emotional outbursts. Yet even as Diana brought a new kind of empathy to the monarchy, reaching out to AIDS patients, holding the hands of the sick, comforting strangers, Anne didn't dismiss her. In fact, she quietly admired her. But admiration can coexist with pain. And the pain came when Diana's marriage to Prince Charles began to crumble. Anne saw it unfold in slow motion. The quiet tears, the isolation, the scandals. But more than anything, she saw something that disturbed her deeply: the presence of Camilla. Long before the public knew the extent of it, Anne had already formed her opinion. Camilla wasn't just a companion to her brother. She was, in Anne's eyes, the wedge that shattered the values the royal family was supposed to uphold. Anne didn't judge mistakes, but she couldn't accept betrayal. And what Charles and Camilla had done, to her, was exactly that. Not just to Diana, but to the institution they were supposed to protect. To Anne, marriage wasn't about personal convenience. It was about duty, commitment, and public trust. Diana had suffered publicly. She had been humiliated and pushed to the edge. And Camilla, no matter how many years passed, no matter how softened her public image became, would always be the reminder of a chapter Anne could never turn the page on. Even after Diana's tragic death, Anne remained resolute. She never publicly condemned Camilla, never stirred controversy. But her disapproval was felt in quiet glances, cool silences, and the sheer absence of warmth. She kept her distance, not out of pettiness, but out of principle. She hadn't just respected Diana. She had believed in what Diana represented, a modern royal spirit that didn't sacrifice compassion for tradition. Diana had brought humanity to the monarchy, and Anne, though less expressive herself, valued that shift. In her own stoic way, she had come to see Diana not as a rival, but as a force the monarchy desperately needed. Losing her wasn't just personal grief, it was an institutional wound. So when Camilla gradually moved from the shadows into the spotlight, from mistress to wife, from companion to queen consort, it struck something deep in Anne. To her, it wasn't just the rewriting of history, it was the erasing of pain that had never truly healed. Within palace walls, those closest to Anne began to notice the tension. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was always there. In meetings, in formal events, in family photographs. The air between her and Camilla remained distant. Cordial, yes, but never close. Anne upheld protocol. She would never disrespect the crown, even when it came wearing a face she couldn't welcome. But beneath the surface, the emotional rift ran deep. In private moments, she rarely spoke about it. But those who worked alongside her understood that her silence wasn't indifference. It was disappointment. A disappointment she carried for decades. And in the final pages of her journal, it showed. She never named names, but the writing was clear enough. She wrote of a betrayal we chose to normalize, and a loss that never received its full mourning. These weren't the words of a woman seeking revenge. They were the quiet confessions of someone who had tried, again and again, to swallow the pain, for the sake of family, for the sake of duty, but could never quite let it go. Diana's shadow never left the palace, and for Anne, it wasn't a ghost to fear. It was a standard to remember, one she refused to see forgotten. Princess Anne didn't leave with fanfare, but with purpose, and that silence spoke louder than any royal proclamation. Her farewell wasn't just a departure from a residence. It was a departure from a way of life, a quiet stand against a system shifting too far from its roots. In leaving, she upheld the very values she feared were slipping away: dignity, duty, and truth. The envelope, the journal, the Queen's hidden letter, they weren't just personal mementos. They were warnings. And now, as the monarchy moves forward without its most loyal warrior, the question remains: who will carry the weight she left behind?